Right, today I'm going to talk about my favorite band of all time. Now, some may consider this band manufactured, but they became one of the greatest, funkiest, tightest bands of the 1980s. And today we're going to talk about the time, a real funk power. I'm Richard Cole, and this is Amari Sound and Vision.
Last beat to the last lace to the last hand with funk.
Now, it's ironic that one of the greatest funk bands of the 1980s didn't start off as a band. I mean, originally it was not a band. It was, you know, can't say really it was an experiment, but I think it was just kind of a way for Prince to kind of express other musical assets of himself or aspects of himself. What I mean by that, you flash back to 1980, Dirty Mind. This is the third album of his 3 album deal, which is now that's in the rearview mirror. And his new contract gave him the opportunity to produce other acts. So he didn't really have a band in mind. But here's 2 things that kind of help create the time as we know it today. So first you have Morris Day. He's a drummer, was in Prince and Andre Simone's band Grand Central. They were, one of the top 3 groups. You had Flight Time, which had Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis, Monty Moore, Jelly Bean Johnson, bunch of other folks. And then you had Sonny Thompson with his band, The Family, and they were all battling for the, top spot in Minneapolis. And this was during Prince's high school, or Prince, Morris, and Andre's high school days. So after high school, Prince leaves the band, goes in search of a record deal, gets one through Warner Brothers, and that kind of leaves Morris Day kind of out of the pool. Andre ends up in Prince's band once, Prince has to put a touring band together. But Morris was kind of left out in the cold a little bit, left Minneapolis, but ended up coming back, reaching out to Prince, wanting to do music. Prince didn't really have anything available, but he made Morris his videographer. So Morris would be filming all the shows so Prince could take a look at it, see what was right, see what didn't work, and stuff like that. But also, Prince also gave Morris studio access. So Morris is cooking up some grooves. He's cooking up grooves in the skillet and comes up with the groove that would eventually become Party Up. So Prince hears this track, loves it, and says, hey, I want this groove. I want to build a song around it. Tell you what, give you either 10 grand or I'll build a band around you. Morris chooses the band. All right, so now it's Prince and Morris in the studio. So you got Morris Day on drums for a good 80% of the Time's entire career output. But I would say a good number of the tracks, you got Prince on drums. You got Prince on bass, playing everything else. For the first album, you also have Lisa and Dr. Fink on keyboards for some of that. Des Dickerson contributes a couple of songs. Andre Simone originally was supposed to contribute some songs to it, but he kind of got phased out of the project. But the long and short of it is you have the tracks that become the first time album. Now, when it comes time to pick the band, Morris says, hey, I want Jimmy and Terry. They're great songwriters. They're great musicians. Therefore, let's bring in Flight Time. So you've got Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis, Monty Moore. Jelly Bean wasn't going to be part of this because Morris Day originally was just going to stay the drummer. But you had Alexander O'Neal on lead vocals. But when it came down to the finer points of the contract, Alex was like, hey, I want a house, I want a car, I want a whole bunch of money, I got to have more paper. And just kind of the attitude just kind of turned Prince off. So Prince was like, nah, Alexander O'Neal's out. Morris, you be the lead singer. And the rest is somewhat history. The time you had everybody that was a top-notch musician. And, for people that want to get a little cynical and saying, well, Prince did everything. Yeah, Prince is a genius. I know we've been kind of loosely throwing that word around a lot on social media lately. Yeah, he's a genius. And yes, he's one of a kind. Like there's just one James Brown. There's just one Sam Cooke. There's just one, Michael Jackson. There's just one whoever. But that doesn't make any of these musicians any less. Everybody has a role to play. And you need other players. And the time had that extra thing. And I think if it, those 6 or 7, you count Jerome, those musicians, I don't think it would have worked the way that it would have worked had it not been for Jelly Bean Johnson. Had it not been for, Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis, Jesse Johnson, Monty Moore. I don't think it would have, I don't think they would have had the reputation that they have now if it had not been for those musicians to be a part of that. And, again, the records, to be able to interpret those songs like that. Like I said, you had Morris Day on drums, so that's his drumming on most of that. And yeah, Jelly Bean had to replicate that. You had Prince playing whatever he played. And again, if you want to call Prince a genius, yes, he's a genius, but the genius of the musicians of the time, you had to go and deliver that. And not only did they play it note for note, a lot of times they played it better than note for note, because you bringing that energy to the stage and you got to put on a show. And yeah, part of that Prince influence, Jimmy Jam tells that story all the time. Like, Jimmy, what note are you playing on 7779311? Okay, well, I'm playing this chord. Okay, well, what's your left hand doing? Well, there's no left hand part on this. Now get that bass, play that bass part with that left hand. It's got to sound better than the record. And, that mixed in with the rivalry that they had all the way back in high school, that was the key to make, the time who they were, and to make them, as Prince would later say, the only band he was afraid of. Let's talk about Morris Day, the epitome of frontman. Now, granted, James Brown was the godfather, and I don't think that there was ever a frontman that was as dynamic. I think with James, where you had the musicians who were just as known as James, where you had Maceo and Bootsy and Fred Wesley and Clyde Stubblefield and Jabo Starks and, St. Clair Pickney, I can go, we can name off musicians for days. And yeah, it was James's singular vision. But again, situation where the musicians had to execute and get those ideas from you know, James's head out into, you know, into the wild, so to speak. Um, but you know, Morris Day as a front man, you know, it's like, you know, there was some of that James Brown element in there. Also a little bit of that Cab Calloway, and just the force of nature that is Morris's own personality. You know, those three things in combination, you know, made him a force to be reckoned with as far as being the front man. Like I said, we also covered the irony that technically this band was manufactured, but the musicians behind that band were, honest to God, real musicians, real artists. I mean, you had Jimmy and Terry, who were songwriters and would have been okay with wanting to do that within the time, within the Prince camp. You know, if Prince, if he should have done like a Parliament Funkadelic thing, you know, where you had Bootsy on this label and you had Parlette, and then you had the Brides of Funkenstein over here, and you had the Horny Horns over there, and you know, you had this sort of movement, which, you know, the Wu-Tang Clan took it to a whole nother level in the 90s, to where those type of record deals, the way they were getting them, were unprecedented. I don't think we've seen anything like that since then. And, you know, it's that thing, you know, Prince could have gone for that empire. It could have been another Motown. It could have been another Stax. Or it could have been another Wu-Tang Clan, or a pre-Wu-Tang Clan, or the P-Funk template. It could have been that thing to where, like, hey, I got all this talent. Why don't I nurture it from within? You know, but Prince was one of those where, and you see these type of artists where it's like, well, yeah, you call yourself having a label, or you call yourself having this camp, but you're just not going to let anybody be bigger than you. You know, it's like, some cases it's like, hey, let's all get this paper, let's all get this money, you know, we can make this money together, let's work as a team, you know, as Chuck D said, move as a team, never move alone. But you know, you also have those that it's like, no, I can't let them be bigger than me, even though this would help me, or we all make some money, you know, nobody will ever be broke. I can't let you be bigger than me, you know. And sadly, you know, there's a lot of situations like that. I've seen a lot of situations like that. I've seen people of even lesser talent behave, or no talent behave like that, because they were just scared that somebody was going to take the credit, or they were going to get all the shine and get all of this stuff. And it's like, no, we can all make this money together. We can all do this together. We can make it together. But, you know, it's a lot of times, it's not friend business, it's show business. So, like I said, you know, Jam and Lewis was writing their own material. You know, Jesse, in the beginning, kind of struggled a bit, but he came up with Jungle Love. And then after that, you know, he started writing even more great songs and stuff. You know, they were producing their own music. So when you get to like the First Time reunion, half of it is kind of that Prince machine, you know, with Jerk Out and Chocolate, those tracks, One Song That Shall Remain Nameless. And then you had Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis writing and producing some tracks. You had Jesse Johnson contributing Blondie, the backing tracks for that, Blondie, Skillet, Pandemonium, you know. So, you know, Jesse's a powerhouse producer, and Jam and Lewis are powerhouse producers, and Monty Moore, who did, you know, that Jam Pleasure Principle for Janice Control album. You know, the songs 2 through 4 on Alexander O'Neal's first album, those ballads, woo! Man, you know, those are some really great ballads, you know, to check out. So, I mean, you know, like the Beatles, so to speak, or like Fleetwood Mac, where you got these great writers, that are churning out songs. The only way they could have been able to do that is away from Prince. So again, this isn't some manufactured, this isn't some manufactured Backstreet Boys, 98 Degrees. It's not, it's not any of that stuff. It's like, yeah, but it's more, I would say, if you want to talk about manufactured, it's more akin to a little bit like the Monkees, but I would say more like the Beach Boys, where, yeah, you had the talented musicians show they were playing on stage, can prove that they could be in the studio. But because of the level of genius, say, Brian Wilson with the Beach Boys, Prince with everything else, then, yeah, you kind of like at the whims of this genius that's like, okay, I got to have the best of the best of the best. Or in Prince's case, okay, well, Morris is the great drummer, so definitely going to keep using him as much as he could. But at the same time, like, okay, I got to make these notes pristine, but with feeling, with energy. So I think as far as being manufactured, I think that's where that line kind of gets drawn in there. Which brings, the cultural impact of the group. Their legacy. Although they were kind of like clowning the funk, funk is dead and all that stuff, from the B-side, Grace, funk is dead. Funk something you could learn in school. There ain't nothing funky about being cool, but yet still wild and loose. Come on, I beg to differ. There's nothing funkier than that. The Stick, there's nothing funkier than that. Get It Up, cool, funky, kind of more radio friendly funky, but still funky. Pandemonium, Jungle Love, the studio version of The Bird, not the version that's on Ice Cream Castles, but the studio version. That's all pure, unadulterated funk. So, yeah, they kind of, I guess the way of doing it before with, the horn sections and stuff, maybe it was kind of time to change all of that stuff. But the time was still funky. But what do you think? Was the Time your favorite band back in the day? What's your favorite Time album? Or what's your favorite Morris Day album? Or your favorite Jesse Johnson album? Or your favorite Jam and Lewis production? Or your favorite Jelly Bean production? Or even Monty Moyer? Leave me a comment and let me know your thoughts. And that's going to end this episode of Amari Sound and Vision. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Also, become a Patreon supporter. And until the next episode, thanks for listening. Peace. For those of you that want to go deeper than the public episodes, I've created the Amari Inner Circle. It's a private study house that explores the creative in greater detail. We'll have extended episodes. There will be live sessions and also behind the scenes content. So if that resonates, the link is below.